going to talk about two stories that, if you're interested in news, are super interesting. The decision by the trial judge to set in the Trump case in Miami to set a date of August to start the trial, and the Hunter Biden plea deal. I will say, and I'm not going to talk very much, I'm mostly just going to try to keep the conversation going. I will say that the Biden story is getting a lot of the attention today on social media. It's where a lot of the energy is. I think in the long term, it's going to be less significant. If you're talking about the 2024 election, then what the implications of what the trial court judge has done could be, not will be, but could be. So I want to start with Josh Gerstein. Some of you know Josh. He writes for Politico. He's my former colleague at ABC News. He has been, for decades, despite his youthful appearance, one of the best reporters in the country covering anything, in my view. And some of you may know he's one of the two bylines on the breaking the Dobbs leak story of the Supreme Court. But I think he is unparalleled in writing about and thinking about politics and the intersection between politics and the law. And he's part of Politico's team covering the story. So, Josh, I want to ask you a series of questions. And if the answer is you don't know, say you don't know. First is, based on what you know about precedent and past cases, did Hunter Biden get special treatment with this deal? Would someone else who faced what he faced get the same deal that he got?
Well, it sounds like when you say special treatment, you mean lenient treatment. But I think it's
maybe got tougher treatment.
If it's just about the stuff that he, is explicitly part of the deal today, the charges, then I would say, to me, it strikes me as tougher than what most other people facing either a similar tax situation or this obscure gun charge would face, especially if they brought the same history of addiction problems.
So, meaning they just would have dropped it without a plea deal if it was a normal person?
I don't think most federal prosecutors would be particularly interested in bringing a criminal case with either of those fact sets, the tax set or this particular gun.
If they were interested in the gun matter, how could they not have made a charge out of his lying on the form? How can that just be left out of the deal?
Well, I don't know what the answer to that is. There's some language in there that might make it hard to put somebody on probation for that offense. I'm not totally sure why it was left out, although the charge that he is that is part of the deal, it's a little complicated because this felony charge has been charged and brought in court. But as I understand it, he won't formally plead guilty to it. He's going to basically plead guilty to the tax charges, and the other felony gun charge is going to be, if a judge agrees, would be continued for a couple of years, and then the case would be dismissed through something called a diversion program. So, but that charge is actually more serious than the lying on the form charge. So, I don't know. The defense lawyers choose to pick something. This puts the focus more on the fact that maybe he had a gun for 11 days that he shouldn't have had, given his drug problem, and less on his decision to lie. But
okay. The Biden defense lawyers say this is over. This was a comprehensive deal. Everything he might be investigated for is within the four walls of this plea agreement. The press release from the U.S. attorney says the investigation is ongoing. Do you know which it is?
I think both are true. I think that this is a sum total conclusion of all the matters, as they say in court, that are currently known to the U.S. attorney for the District of Delaware regarding Hunter Biden. But the investigation does continue, in that I think it's possible there could be action against other individuals. This obviously has some connection to Burisma, which is a company of sort of dubious background, and a lot of people involved in it, and people who got involved in doing things for Burisma in the United States. And so that's how I read the statement. The investigation is ongoing. They didn't say an investigation of Hunter Biden is ongoing.
So in your senses and your understanding is Hunter Biden is now free and clear when it comes to the U.S. attorney?
I mean, that's a little bit of an overstatement, because it has to go in front of a judge, and he has to remain clean for 2 years, which for him might be a challenge.
How often do federal judges reject a plea agreement agreed to by both parties?
Not often. I'd say less than 5% of the time. I'd also say a diversion in a federal case, on a federal felony case, is a pretty unusual arrangement in a plea deal.
The U.S. attorney, David Weiss, is a Trump appointee holdover. but he's an appointee who got the job out of the recommendation of the Democratic home state senator. So he's not like a Trump guy, right? But
Right.
there's no, just like the attorney general and deputy attorney general did not want to leave any fingerprints on the decision to indict Donald Trump. I've not seen or heard anything about whether Weiss made this decision on his own. The attorney general had previously said, as you've reported, that he was going to leave this to Weiss. Is there any indication that you know of that Weiss got permission to do this deal, or he just did it on his own?
I have not heard that there's permission. I'd be stunned if there wasn't notification up the chain. And we do know that there's some back and forth about this case at the most senior levels of the Department of Justice. I believe it was reported earlier that the tax people were, deeply involved in dealing with the tax charge. So I can't say, as we sit here on this call, that I know for sure that that Garland gave the sign off to go to this resolution. Kind of knowing how he's approached this, and as you bring up the president's case and others, he seems to be trying to push those decisions away to the extent he can. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was told about it and he didn't object, and that's the sense in which he signed off on it.
Right. There's this Justice Department, I don't know if it's a regulation or what, thing that's read Twitter, it keeps retweeting, that if you've got an offense that involves a gun charge, unless the deputy attorney general signs off on it, you can't give somebody this 2 years to get clean and then it's dismissed. You know what I'm talking about? Have you seen that?
Yeah, I haven't seen that, but I think I know what you're talking about.
Does that mean that the deputy attorney general, who's more political than the attorney general, signed off on this, or not necessarily?
I think it means that her office signed off on it in the same way that that Garland did, but I don't know if that means that there's a specific piece of paper that approves on it. I will say, as I said before, it's divergence in any federal case. It's unusual, other than say a very low level drug offense.
So is it fair to say that within the offenses that are within the four walls of the plea agreement, he didn't get off easy, but given the nature of the fact that the charges were at play, he did get off easy? Does that make sense? And if so, is it correct?
Yeah, I think that that's right. And also given the nature of the fact that there are other matters about Hunter Biden that are out there that we are reporting are resolved in the view of his lawyers by this agreement, all of his foreign business deals, everything that was sort of discussed on the laptop and so forth, like any liability that he has around those things. So that's all part of the back and forth. And Mark, some of the lawyers who are involved here, Chris Clark and Abby Lowell, they're simply not going to allow their client to plead guilty to anything without that being a definitive resolution.
Right. That was my reaction when I saw the deal, that they obviously knew that it's over. I want to talk about the politics of this in a second, but does anybody have any questions for Josh? If you do, you can raise your physical hand or your electronic hand if you want to ask Josh any questions about the legal aspects of this. John Podhoretz, please.
You say that Lowell wouldn't have agreed to this, or his lawyers wouldn't have agreed to this without this being the final resolution, but that begs the question of what might turn up as a result of the House investigation into him. No, or
yes. I mean,
I never know what begs the question means, so I shouldn't use begs the question.
You mean if there's a
raises
referral,
the question of what the House investigation.
If there's a referral, they could open it back up. Is that what you're asking?
I have a theory that we are in a position where him pleading guilty to offenses does not make the idea that he might have committed more offenses less attractive or less believable. It makes it more believable.
My take on that is this is exactly why federal prosecutors are very reluctant, by and large, to give letters to people saying, we've investigated you and you're off the hook, because they never know what's going to come out next. If it turns out that Hunter Biden, murdered 3 people and dumped their bodies in the Meadowlands or something, then obviously he can be prosecuted for that. I think within today or the next few days, we'll see the terms of the actual plea agreement. And I think the language will be very similar to saying something like all matters currently known to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware. So if the House investigation were to turn up some kind of smoking gun, I very much doubt the federal prosecutors have promised him that for time immemorial, he will never face the following charges, because they just never do that for anybody.
What about charges related to his business dealings?
The wording I've usually seen is the matters known to prosecutors. So,
right. But presumably it didn't take him 5 years just to turn over these stones, right? I mean, 5 years is a long time to come up with this deal, unless they looked at a lot of other stuff.
Correct. I mean, this stuff is pretty discreet. It's his taxes. It's this bizarre episode with the gun and it being thrown in a dumpster in a shopping mall somewhere. And he had the gun, as his lawyers stressed, for a total of 11 days while he was, drugged out. So, I can't imagine that took more than 6 months for them to get to the bottom of those issues. So there must have been other issues going around. There were a lot of negotiations, obviously, about how to address the gun charge and the tax charge.
Right. But even that wouldn't take 5 months, let alone 5 years.
Wouldn't take 5
Does anybody have any other questions for Josh about the politics? Bill Smith. About the politics, about the law. Bill Smith.
Yes, real quick. I read, of course, on the internet today that one reason the prosecutor left the investigation open, so to speak, was that so the House committee could not obtain the evidence that they have, that they could turn down any request or possibly a subpoena saying this is an ongoing investigation. We're not going to give up our sources and so on.
Josh, is that a red state fever dream, or is there some truth?
I think it's possible that that's something that they're going to claim. I mean, as a technical matter, while the prosecution is still pending, the investigation is sort of still pending. We had this at the end of the Hillary Clinton email investigation too, where it seemed to linger. Of course, it came back to life and so forth. So I do think that could be a door that they're leaving open. I think as a practical political matter, if there's nothing else really being done on this investigation, it will become as a practical matter, impossible for the DOJ to hold all that material back just on the technical claim that the investigation's open. You can pull that in response to a FOIA request or a FOIA suit, but it'll be difficult to sustain in the face of a congressional subpoena.
Right. All right. So we still got to cover the politics of this, and then I really do want to talk about the Trump thing, because I said at the beginning, I think that's a bigger deal long term. I want to give you 2 data points on the politics of it. First of all, within 3 minutes of the plea deal being announced, I got a text from a Republican senator who said he was in the grocery store and a voter recognized him and was animatedly asking him how Hunter Biden could get such a sweetheart deal. That's one chance interaction, but my sense is that this is going to inflame Red America for a good long time, regardless of how the Trump cases end up. There's the difference between what is and what ought to be. Josh put in context that this is not a sweetheart deal by, at least some measures. This will be forevermore in Red America a sweetheart deal, no matter what happens. I think Don Jr. so often speaks for Red America. Tweet: imagine living in a country where the president openly tries to send the leader of his political opposition to prison for life while giving his blatantly corrupt son a sweetheart deal to avoid prison and keep the grift going. Wouldn't want to mess up that 10% for the big guy. So there's no indication the president was involved in the deal, obviously, but this to me is going to be the burned in view of Red America. And I think it helps Donald Trump quite a bit with the notion that it's two-tier justice. And almost every Republican senator has said it that I've seen. I'll be curious to see what, John Thune says about it. Last I checked, he hadn't said anything. John Podhoretz, what's your view of the politics of this?
I think that this is the best news that Trump could have gotten at this moment, because it distracts a little bit from the catastrophe that was last night's interview, and further muddies the waters. If he can create a parallel as we go along between now and 2024, between the prosecution of Trump and the slap on the wrist of Hunter Biden, that is the sweetest spot that he can find until this goes into a courtroom, and what he did to himself last night becomes the province not of public opinion and his standing in the Republican Party vis-a-vis other people, but actually with a judge and 12 jurors who are going to decide his fate in the starkest possible fashion. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a criminal procedure person, but I don't really understand how he did not just seal his fate. Obviously, jury nullification and one juror who want to convict him is his way out of this. But you know, that was the Jack Nicholson screaming, "Yeah, I did order them to kill him" moment. You don't really get moments like that very often in life where somebody says, "Yeah, I did it. I just was worried I wanted to make sure my golf pants, I couldn't let them have the boxes until I took my golf pants out of the boxes. So it's like, yeah, I didn't obey the subpoena, you know, sue me." It's like, okay, you're sued.
Were you saying sweetheart deal in air quotes?
Yes, I was saying sweetheart deal. In other words, he says this is unfair.
Okay. Right.
And that'll work to some extent, and it'll work with a lot of people to some extent. But it would have worked a whole lot better had he not said what he said to Brett Baer last night.
Right. I want to end on time, and I want to leave time to talk about this Trump trial court judge. So let me ask, do other people have questions about the politics of the Hunter Biden plea deal that they want to ask? Raise your hand if you have a question about the Hunter Biden, the politics. John Brody.
Hey, everybody. I'm just a regular guy kind of, but I noticed that this morning on Fox and Friends, the hosts were kind of questioning what happened last night in the Trump interview. And I just think that this is going to completely blow that aside. Like, I think there could have been a lot more picking apart of the Trump interview, which now obviously is just not going to happen. So I think it's just politically, it just seems to me that it's an incredible gift for Trump.
Yeah, I think John made that point too. And I think it's absolutely right. At least in the short term. Long term, it could be, as John also said, his undoing. On the Trump trial thing, the big deal is, you know, she set a trial date in August. It's obviously not going to start in August. But John and I last week talked about whether there could possibly be a trial in that case before the election. I didn't think so. Then she quickly, after the court appearance, said Trump's lawyers need to start getting their security clearances. She didn't have to do that as quickly as she did. And that made me start to have a little bit of doubt about where her head is at. Today, I think, gives us no doubt. She's from a rocket docket district, and she's trying to move this fast. Everyone in the country wants us to move fast, except for Trump and obviously his lawyers. And I now think it's possible, as John correctly pointed out to me last week, it's now possible there could be a trial before the election. And to me, that's everything, because what happens in a trial and whether there is a trial after the election, much different set of options than if it's before the election. And if it's before the election, I think his chances of winning the general are significantly lower than if it's after. The other thing she did today, not getting as much attention that I think is a big deal, is she said where the trial is going to be and therefore where the jury pool is going to come from. It's from northern part of where she sits. That's going to be more Trumpy. The place where the juries are going to come from, as I understand it, it's about 50-50. The further south you go in South Florida, the more Democratic it is. So that's a break for him, since he only needs one juror to hold out to get a hung jury. And I suppose someday there could be a scenario where there's a hung jury and he gets retried, but I doubt it, whether it's before the election or after. So that's potentially a big deal. I don't know, again, how quickly she can move things along. There can't be a trial in August, but could there be a trial before Iowa? I still am skeptical. And I still think that if there's no trial before Iowa, under Justice Department guidelines, it's hard for me to see how they make the guy sit in the dock while there's a presidential election going on. But maybe there's a window in the spring of next year, like 11 months from now. So I'd love to hear, Josh, what you think about the timing question of whether what she did today means there could be a trial this year, or is she just, doing what trial courts do? She's setting a rigorous schedule and then she'll see what happens.
So on the schedule, I have a colleague that went back through all of her criminal cases, which there are not very many of since she took the bench a few years ago, and saw sort of similar orders to the order that was put in place today. This seems to be her MO, to put cases on a very short track for trial. But then, as in many other criminal cases, the sides come forward and say, we can't do it that fast, and here are the reasons that she pushes them out. I do think in this context, when I saw that order last week saying you got to get your security clearances, tell me you've done it by today, you've started the process by today. My takeaway was that if there are delays in the case, she doesn't want to be the one on the
Right.
hook for them, that she doesn't want to be the one
Right.
that
Totally
Trump
agree.
appointed judge is
Yep.
slow walking the case through
Yep.
through the election. So I think if it's feasible to have a trial before the election, she'll probably try to move that way. I would say, having covered many cases involving classified information, as the practitioners call it, the SEPA process, whatever lawyers on both sides predict about how long it will take is usually about half as long as it takes.
It's worse. It's worse than contractors or contractors in Manhattan or Congress. It always takes at least twice as long.
It always, they think 6 months, it's a year. They think a year, it's 2 or 3
Right.
years. So
That's why in the end, Podhoretz will be wrong and I'll be right. But
I think it's possible she might set a trial next year, regardless of the political calendar.
Right.
On the jury pool, not to
Yeah.
sharply disagree, but I took her order to mean that the pretrial hearings and so forth will go forward at her not personal, but she is the only sitting judge in Fort Pierce. But the trial is still listed for the West Palm Beach division, and I'm not sure she can move the trial to Fort Pierce without some kind of formal motion to change venue. So I don't think that's decided yet.
But even there, that's a better jury pool for him than moving it to Miami.
Oh yeah, no, Palm Beach is somewhat better, right? I think it's 46% Trump in Palm Beach versus 42% in Dade County.
Yeah. I'll tell you the other issue in terms of whether there'll be, the focus so far, of course, has been on her. But what's going to happen at the Court of Appeals level and the Supreme Court, right? Because every time she rules against Trump in terms of speedy trial, he'll appeal. We saw in 2020 when he thought the courts of appeals and the Supreme Court would be his friends, they pretty quickly and uniformly ruled against him. But I could easily imagine that happening again, where she rules, no, we're moving forward. Trump appeals, and they just keep saying no. Trial, we defer to the trial judge. Is that possible? And wouldn't that have to be part of any story about a trial before the election?
I think that if you look at the law on these classified information matters, the government is in a much better position to appeal before trial than the defendant is. And
I don't think the defense can appeal at all before trial, right?
They can't do a formal appeal, but they can do a mandamus and try to basically force the 11th Circuit to step in. But she's going to have a tremendous amount of discretion over the pace of the case. The 11th Circuit will really have to go out of its lane and cross the yellow line if they think that they are going to regulate those kinds of matters from Atlanta.
I want to put an underline on the point Josh made, which I think is for me the key takeaway of this, which is she does not want to be accused of dragging her feet on this. It doesn't mean she'll move it as fast as August for sure, or that there'll be a trial, but she's clearly signaled that she is not going to be the Trump appointee who slow walked it to help Donald Trump politically. And that's a pretty big deal. It means a trial before the election is possible. This will be recorded. It'll be sent around so you all can see it again if you loved it so much the first time or want to just try to figure out what color Josh's shirt is, because I'm having trouble with that. Is it green? What color
it is green, yeah. But the lights are brown, so I don't know how it comes out.
And those of you who are Mario level are able to join the focus group later this week. 8 Republican voters. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about what's going on with Trump, and then the salon coming up. There'll be more of these. We'll continue to play with the format, and sometimes, hopefully, they'll be announced on a little bit longer notice than today's was. But I do want to do them when there is breaking news, so that that they're timely. All right. Thank you all for joining. Appreciate it. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. See you in the morning.